Så er det igen blevet tid til at byde velkommen til Papstinenser, din podcast om brætspil. Din studievært er Christian Bak-Petersen.
Velkommen til Papstinenser, din podcast dedikeret udelukkende til brætspil og moderne kortspil. Bag podcasten står Papskubber, den danske side på noget om brætspil, fyldt med nyheder, anmeldelser, regelhjælp, artikler og anbefalinger til, hvad jeres næste brætspil kan være. Mit navn er Christian Bak-Petersen, og i dag der skal jeg bare lige hurtigt introducere dagens gæst. Han hedder Dave Neale. Ham fik Peter og producer Bo logget ind i studie 13 på Hobro Vandrehjem, da Dave besøgte Fastaval i påsken her 2019. Dave Neale er en amerikansk spildesigner, der også arbejder med psykologi, og så er han en af folkene bag den nyeste tilføjelse til serien af Unlock-spil, den der hedder Unlock-Heroic-Adventures, hvor han står bag Sherlock Holmes-scenariet. Han har også et nyt spil på bedding, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, The Baker Street Irregulars. Et spil, der bør lande her til efteråret, hvis vi er opdateret, og som er udgivet af Space Cowboys. Ja, ham Dave, han er ret glad for Sherlock Holmes. Så lyt med til en snak om escape room-spil, Sherlock Holmes, spildesign, narrativer, gode og knap så gode løsninger, når et spil skal sætte spillerne under pres, og så spil med fortællinger generelt. God fornøjelse. Vi ses, Christian.
Okay, I'm Dave Neale. I design primarily narrative and mystery solving board games. I have designed the latest box set for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective that is out in, well, towards the end of this year, called the Baker Street Irregulars, and also one of the Unlock scenarios in the latest Unlock set, which is a Sherlock Holmes scenario. And I also did a non-narrative real-time game called 5 Minute Chase, and I've also got a few. I'm currently developing a few other narrative games.
Great. What's your story with Sherlock Holmes?
With Sherlock Holmes.
Why Sherlock Holmes?
Why Sherlock Holmes? Yeah. I guess I have Sherlock Holmes to thank for having this kind of job as designing games at all. And I always loved Sherlock Holmes growing up. I read like all the stories when I was a child, and I seem to remember making up some of my own stories actually when I was in primary school, and maybe putting on plays and things I think that were about Sherlock Holmes. So I was always into Sherlock, and then I discovered the old Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective set in the attic quite a few years back now when it was out of print, and that's games from the 80s. And
yeah, I was just about to ask, how old is the original?
Yeah, the original was published in 1981.
All right.
And so it was pretty innovative because at that time there was not really much else in board games doing that kind of thing. You had obviously the whole role-playing thing that had emerged, and it was taking some of those ideas and then applying them in more of a board game context and in a Sherlock Holmes theme. And so you had this freedom to explore this Victorian world, to try and solve these mysteries, and you were reading the text of the different clues you find at different locations. You had a newspaper full of Victorian stories that could have some clues. A lot of it's irrelevant. You have to kind of find the relevant stuff. And it's incredibly immersive, and I found it an amazing experience of, wow, this really feels like solving a Sherlock Holmes mystery. I love this game. Played through the 10 cases in the box, and then there was nothing else. And I knew there were expansions, but I hadn't managed to acquire them at that point. And so I just started thinking about it, thought it was a cool way of writing stories, and perhaps remembering my primary school Sherlock Holmes inventions, I came up with an idea myself. Probably wasn't one of the ones I came up with when I was in primary school. It might have been a little bit more developed than that, but came up with something and made a case based on it, which I then just kind of gave to friends to play, and it worked well. I revised it a bit, made it better, and that was kind of it. I think maybe I did a second one too when I came up with a different idea, and then I heard it was being republished, and I contacted Istari, who were republishing it at that point, and said, here's case I've written, or 2 cases maybe, in case you are thinking of publishing new things after you've done this one, you can look at this. And I got a reply saying, yeah, we'll take a look. Yeah, and then there was kind of just a long gap, and
I would have said fast forward, but that's not usually how it works.
Yeah.
It's a forward of some kind, but not fast.
it's slow forward.
Yeah, slow forward.
The slow forward button was pressed, and I kind of kept developing some new cases, and it got to the point. I mean, the story got merged with Space Cowboys, and they became one company. Space Cowboys were relaunching the style of the boxes and things, and I, by this point, had written more, and I think by that point I might have had 6 cases I'd done, and I'd come up with this idea of having separate cases you were solving, but where there was also some kind of connecting thread. But I didn't want it to be the case that players had to have played the previous ones,
right,
or had to necessarily remember things. I didn't want people to have to be like, oh, we can't solve this because we needed to remember from case 4 that this thing happened. But I also wanted this sense of like something building and coming together, and some kind of finale feeling in the last one. So I kind of came up with this idea of separate cases, but there are certain elements in them which you realise towards the end link together. And then once you get to the final case, it kind of tells you some bits you can go back and look at from previous ones, and basically you are then doing this finale thing. So I'd done that by this point when I eventually got this email from them saying, we want to do a whole box set of your stuff because we've played your cases now and we like them, so can you please write more and let's meet and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
And that's what got me into the whole thing and through Sherlock Holmes. So I have Sherlock Holmes to thank, and the original game designers, Suzanne Goldberg, who designed the original game, and Gary Grady. I've been in contact with Suzanne Goldberg actually because I got her contact details from Space Cowboys, and yeah, that was quite interesting writing to her about my experience with her game, and so yeah, I have them to thank, and Sherlock Holmes and Space Cowboys very much, right. Especially Thomas Cowie from Space Cowboys. He's kind of been my point of contact and championed my cases, I think, in the company.
Great. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what are the design challenges in writing stories or games, crossover, hybrids, like what you're doing? I mean, I'm guessing it's different from other more mechanical-driven games. So try and take us a little bit into that world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different directions you can come up with that question, because it's the kind of thing I think about a lot, I guess.
Sure.
Thinking, so it is...
it could be a very direct question. How would you approach writing a case for either a card-driven game or a more narrative-driven game? However you choose to. Yeah,
well, they're slightly different there, I guess. I mean, to think... So I did the Sherlock Holmes Unlock scenario, and for that, it was... essentially, I just suddenly thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to try to make an Unlock scenario that very much captured the feel of an actual murder mystery investigation?
Yeah.
And then it was kind of the case of taking the mechanisms that were there and thinking, well, okay... I came up with a few possible plots, and then it was like, how can I fit the mechanisms that exist in the game to tell these stories? And there was some where it was like, I can't figure out a way they could tell this story, so therefore I narrow it down to this one, and then this one. And then there were other challenges I faced along the way, but there was this kind of, that was the process that way round.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, could you, like, in 2 or 3 sentences, tell us what Unlock is? What kind of a game is that?
Yeah.
Seen through your glasses.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, my original experience playing the first Unlock sets where, and I guess this was the kind of vision of it when it was put out, was very much that kind of, oh, let's capture an escape room, a physical escape room in a deck of cards, and let's put the mechanisms in that capture that experience purely.
So we have card combinations, and we have some sort of a timer
that's going to count down, and you have to get out of the room, the virtual room, before the timer runs out on the app. And you are combining cards like a key and a box to open the box, and the kind of things that represent what you do in an actual physical escape room.
Yeah. Some cards disappear or gets used and are not relevant anymore. And
so once you use the key and you use the key in the box, you discard the key in the box card, and you now have an open box card, right? Things like that.
Right.
And then inside the box is something else, which you then use for something else. And you're working through the whole deck of cards until you get to the end point, and you're entering codes. You have to work out 4-digit codes, which as people who've done real escape rooms will know, you have to do a lot in real escape rooms. So you're working out these different codes, entering them in the app, and the app then says take card 50 or whatever. You take that card, it gives you something else. Keep going, and then it's normally one of the codes that ends the game. You normally have to work out the final code. You realise you're right at the end. Here's the last thing we have to do to get out of the room or whatever. Find the code, enter it, and that's when you win.
Yeah, but as I see it, the Unlock, the mechanism in the first Unlock series was very much, you know that you're on the right track because you're progressing, right? You couldn't have opened the door if you hadn't had the key. So how does that relate to like describing or telling I wouldn't say murder scenario because I don't know if that's the case in Sherlock Holmes, but it's more like a mystery where you, I'm guessing that at least it is in Consulting Detective, you don't really know if you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, there are some hints, and in some of my Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective cases, there is a bit more of things you discover where you know. But to stick to Unlock for the moment, there's in when I came up with that idea of this story, I think I was thinking exactly on those lines. Like, if you were doing a real murder investigation, you don't just do this thing, then this thing, then this thing in a set order and follow along and have this clear linear progression. So one of the first things I was thinking is, okay, you've got the crime scene. What are all the directions you can go from here? You find these different things. This thing seems to suggest you should go and do this thing. This thing suggests you should go and speak to this person. And so the players might find different things at different times. So you do have this branching pathway at the beginning where you can go in multiple directions.
Quite the opposite of an escape room.
Yes.
Being locked inside a tight room with a given set of clues, right?
Yeah. So it's moved quite away from the original escape room parallel. You've still got the timer. You're still combining cards. You're still entering the codes. But now the whole wrapping of that, the whole premise is quite different for mine. And I think for the others, I think there's more of an emphasis on story now generally in the Unlock series. And so you can branch in these different directions. And at the end, there is this kind of, there is the thing, I mean, what you're saying about knowing whether you're progressing or not, that was a particular issue I faced because, as when we were talking yesterday, I was explaining about the fact that I wanted the ending, I wanted the players to have to actually solve a mystery. Yeah. And that's quite hard in Unlock because what you can do is you can make the players have to work out a 4-digit code, or you can make the players have to just work out, oh, these two cards should go together. Yeah. But to have them work out, here's a set of circumstances, who did this and why did they do it and what's the story behind this is very hard because you've got no way of knowing they have done that, right? Right. So, but I wanted that. I was like, that's what I want. I want a real feeling of a murder mystery. And in a real murder mystery, it's not one little thing at a time. You kind of, at the end, you have to go, here's all the information. Yeah. What happened? And so I kind of found a way to kind of make that work, I think. There are still steps you do. You kind of realize little things at a time, and then you go, oh, well, maybe this. And then you're like, oh, yeah, look, hang on. That's a thing. So then maybe that means this and this. And you can gradually piece together the story. And then there's a way of kind of testing that the players definitely do know the story behind the crime, basically.
What actually happened.
Yeah. Right. Rather than just
like guessing or combining for the sake of combining.
Yeah. They should, I think, absolutely know exactly what has happened and who did it and why.
Right. Yeah. Have you worked like consequences? Because we've all played these kind of escape rooms where at some point you will just go, you know, if the key, I have 20 keys, one lock, it's brute force, right? At some point I will get the correct key into the correct lock. Yeah. Is there any way of like inserting consequences in these kinds of games? Does that make sense?
Oh, where for the wrong combinations? Yeah. Because Unlock has the penalty thing. So if you do the wrong combinations or whatever, you get time penalties or negative penalties, which like reduce your final score. Yeah.
But I was thinking more in terms of narrative.
In terms of narrative
negatives.
Yeah, in terms of narrative negatives, I mean, in the process, in the one I've done, in the process of the actual investigation, there are times when you will have like little deductive puzzles where you've got to work out one thing, and you're kind of trying to enter the answer in the app. And in that case, you could brute force it. You could just guess every option, and you'll just basically get a standard like unlock penalty. The ending, you can't really brute force it.
Right.
I don't think. I think that you kind of could in a way. Yeah, it wouldn't. But if you did the right thing, you would still know the solution.
Right thing,
yeah.
But 50 Clues is, I don't know if you've tried the...
I played it, yeah.
But yeah, what Jeppe definitely chose to do, and I interviewed him about that last year, was that he sort of hated the real life like management of an escape room. Of course, you are booking that for an hour or an hour and a half, so they sort of have to kick you out if you're stuck.
Yeah.
So he sort of turned the timer on its head and said, right, you're starting at hour 0, and then however long time you take to solve this mystery, I will just like end the narrative in a different way.
Right. Yeah.
I actually think that worked pretty well for a detective kind of scenario, because there wasn't like I have tried. Have you played Chronicles of Crime or the
I've played one of them. Yeah.
Where all of a sudden you have your detective or your boss is calling you saying, well, it's late at night, I want you all into the office now. And it's sort of, okay, right, that was the timer. That was the timer speaking out very loudly to me in a, but I think it was interesting that he sort of made the timer just take along, and people could actually have an idea and a sense of completion or a sense of emergency right up until the end, and they pull this dead girl out of whatever. Won't spoil it. And I don't know if I think you're just being told that you were too late. You don't know if you were 5 minutes too late or an hour and a half too late. But you were too late.
It's a good way of doing it in general in narrative games. I think when people, a lot of narrative games initially there's this struggle with this whole loss condition thing, right?
Yeah.
You often, you have this thing of like you want it to be a game. You want people to be able to. Therefore, you want people to be able to kind of succeed and fail. But on the other hand, you don't want people to be playing through a story and then it's like, oh, now you die and fail, that's it, the end, and it's suddenly over, and they don't have any sense of kind of completion or satisfaction or understand anything that happened, and you're like, well, that's it, bye. So you have this tension of like, well, how do we resolve that? And that kind of thing where it's not so much, and it's not so much the time runs out and then it's like, right, you've lost, now it's pointless. It's more like the time has run out, now there's going to be a different ending, and you get that sense of, okay, we're just aiming to try and get a good ending.
That's being able to complete, but not necessarily save the girl or whatever it is.
Yeah.
On that note, I want to ask you about what your experience is in terms of people's head, or sort of the group mentality that happens when you're doing these kinds of mystery games. Well, I guess I've played both the older Unlocks and Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, actually Cthulhu Mythos series as well.
Yeah.
And in my play group, it is often, I don't think we're particularly stupid, but I guess a bit. but it's very hard to you have worked with how Sherlock completed his. I mean, he's so good that he did it in 8 minutes, and now you can see if you can keep up, right? And you're just going, what the fuck did he think about it? How did the Bulgarian circus in any way set him off in this direction, or something like that? How does that work when writing the narratives of these games? Are you thinking about not driving people to I wouldn't say disbelief, but sort of not motivated to continue? Like when you have in an Unlock game, when the timer comes to, you have 8 minutes left, then people just stops playing, right? We've failed anyway, so let's just make some coffee, and we know we didn't make it at this point, right? And it's sort of it can be sad note on ending a game, like, well, we're so horrible that we didn't even
I mean, it kind of. People tend to finish anyway, right? Because they're curious and they want to see the puzzle and they want to see the end, and at least you kind of can finish there. And I guess it's kind of.
But if you're locked in a room and you don't believe anymore that you can come out of the room, then you are at the ending, right?
You've sort of ended in a negative, but then you still see the end of the story. But that's kind of what we were saying. It's kind of that different twist that Jeppe put on it when if he said like, okay, after you end after this time, there's a different ending.
At least
there's just it's different than just saying, okay, you've lost, you've failed, but finish if you want, kind of thing. Is slightly different. But yeah, so this whole thing of like. When do players, the motivation of players, and I know with the original Consulting Detective, one of the things some people found frustrating was this, how incredibly hard it is to be anywhere near close to Holmes's performance, and yet, and it seems to be that people tend to fall into these two groups of people who play it, fail miserably, read Holmes's thing and are like, oh wow, yeah, well, Holmes is the master. Isn't it funny how we failed like this? And we could have noticed these things and we didn't. That's kind of cool. And then there are other players who do it and like, what? How the hell we couldn't ever have got that? This is awful. And you get these. So people go in those two directions. And with mine, I've tried to kind of help the players who are more who found that a negative experience to some extent. I'm more aiming to make it clear that the game is not about trying to equal or beat Holmes. That is not what you're doing. Yeah. You're trying to get a high score, but that is it. You're trying to get as high as you can. If you get anywhere near Holmes, like basically you've done absolutely amazing. So if you end up with like a score of 30, then you're doing pretty well. You're all right, kind of thing. So try and make that clearer so people aren't having unreasonable expectations. And I've gone over and over again trying to make the thread of Holmes's logic really strong, hopefully. Like every time I playtest it, I go through the thread of logic with all the people I've played, and if any of them's like, I don't understand why he would have done this and then this, then I change it. And I've done that with all of them to try and make it, hopefully, like a real, genuine, ironclad sequence of logic. I hope I've got to that point. Can't guarantee it, but hopefully it's like that. Still very, very hard. No, still obviously players do not follow the same. I've never had any group follow the same trail or do it as quickly as him. And I one of the interesting things I find testing these things and giving them to people is noticing why that happens and why that's the case. One thing I realized is how much this kind of game, and I guess probably detective work in general, is simply about paying attention. And people will, because when I first started designing these things, I would put in these clues that were kind of hidden and subtle, and I was like, oh yeah, and if they notice that this person said this and mentioned this, and this other person mentioned something kind of similar, they'll realize they're probably talking about the same thing, and they'll put that together and they'll know to go over here. Nobody noticed any of that whatsoever, and they'd all go off in random directions, but oh, it's too hard, make it a bit easier, make it a bit easier. And eventually, I mean, what you're kind of worried about as a designer is that you make it too easy, right? Sure. You don't want to have this, like, oh, I've got this exciting clue, and you give it out there, and they're like, oh, it's this and this, and you're like, oh damn, that feels really unsatisfying to me now that that's happened. But then that meant I started, and it was much too hard. But what I discovered later was that you can put stuff in there, and you can spell it out 100%, and people will not get it. So I would have things where it's like, they go to somebody's house, and someone will tell them something, and they'll say, oh yeah, he came back last night at midnight, and then he left early this morning. And then they'll be taking notes, and then they'll go like, where do we go now? Let's go over here to this pub. And they go there, and then one of them say, but we don't know what time he came back last night, do we? So that's going to be a problem. And the others will go, yeah, right, yeah. And I'm sitting there going, you just read it. It was right there. And it made me realize, like, you know, even when stuff is 100% spelled out, people can miss it. And so when it's actually something you have to work out, is in this kind of game where there's so much information, like in Consulting Detective, just remembering and paying attention to the information is a challenge in itself.
Have you played Detective, a modern board crime?
No, I've got it, and I've watched some playthroughs at the beginning of it. I haven't actually played yet. There's
a few cases of that exact thing that I've experienced. There is very, very, very mild spoilers for the game, but there's at one point in the introduction, it's like, read this very carefully, and then we read it, and then we went along with the case, and we just got completely stuck, and it was because one of the first things they had written was
pay attention.
what we needed to do. And we had just, sure, set up, blah, 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 let's go.
Yeah. No, but I mean, to me, it wouldn't seem like a satisfying gaming experience of like transcribing everything I have read or heard or... Yeah, and in modern detective, it's even worse because you have what was meant in a good way, but it's that so much more information because you have a digital partner in terms of the internet. You can browse things and go into the crime database and stuff like that.
We have like the craziest murder wall when we're done. It's just like red line between pictures.
In terms of at what time did he get home from the pub? You would go. Okay, so every time we get a new information, we put that into our collective transcription of everything. Yeah. And every time we have to answer a question, then we have to go over everything because it might be in here somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And that's perhaps the last thing I want to touch or run by you, Dave, is do you have any idea of the timing between plays when doing these types of games, because people can't remember, like they play the first scenario in the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective like the 1st of January, and then it's mid-February before they play the next one. And in that case, the transcription or the case notes or the newspaper and everything is right back where you started.
Yeah.
But now you have the anticipation of us perhaps remembering the last session, which for us was a complete different life. But for you as a designer, I'm guessing it was 2 different tabs in a spreadsheet or whatever it was for you.
Yeah, in terms of,
should the boxes have a designated play frequency on them?
Well, I mean, that kind of depends how much it's dependent, how much they're linked and stuff, right? I mean, obviously you can do...
you said that initially. Yeah, it's not a necessity, but it's...
Not a necessity, which is what I
on the cake, right?
try to aim for. And I'm doing some other things at the moment, again, which there is continuity. So you're playing multiple different kind of cases, stories, and there is also like this story that threads through all of it, and a sort of some kind of finale climax to the whole thing at the end. But I've always been quite concerned with that exact thing. I think ideally, every one you should be able to pick up the next one and play it and remember absolutely nothing about what's happened before.
Right.
In almost every case, except perhaps when you get to the very end.
Sure.
But generally, you should be able to do that. And what I like to do is make that the case, but then also, and it's kind of a challenge for me, which I like to, is then make that the case, but also have this undercurrent of a different story somehow threaded through there, which then does tie everything together. So you never have cases that are fully dependent on remembering the last one or going on to the next one. You kind of get this satisfying, complete story in that case, but then you go a bit further and you're like, hang on a minute, the thing that happened in that case actually links to this thing that happened in this case. Yeah. And when you get to the very end, like the way I did it in my Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective set is that it tells you specifically once you get to the very end, you can look at these bits of the previous ones. So you might have played all the previous ones like years ago, and it's now like, okay, now you've realised there are some things important in the previous ones. You're allowed to look at the introduction of this and this, and then you can begin playing. So you look back, you get the right bits you might need, and then you play. So I think that's important. I think it's hard to ask people to remember information and play a sequence where things are very, very dependent on the previous ones. I think that's tough.
Or it should be like on the box. It says, well, if this will be fantastic. Once a week for a month and a half, then you have a fantastic experience, right?
Yeah.
But if you break it up and you go like have
a long
kids
time
and watch them grow up before you continue to the next scenario, then you're sort of asking for trouble.
Yeah. And I mean, mine I think are probably in a way more satisfying if you play them close together, particularly the ones towards the end. I mean, there aren't links between all 10 in mine. It's kind of the later ones have this linking thread. And if you play those sort of close to each other, I think there'll kind of be a more satisfying experience because you will feel more of that build up, and then when it gets to the end, you'll be able to connect it a little bit better. But so it will be maybe a bit more satisfying experience, but it's in no way dependent on that, and you could have a year in between and still be able to do it. So that's what I aimed for. I think that's what I've achieved.
I think the last connecting question I want to ask you is how does it work in terms of artwork and like visual clues in terms of what are your job done, if I can use that word, when it's written, or does someone else sort of interpret it, or I mean,
is for Unlock specifically with the art,
or the mention in Sherlock Holmes, like there's
particular things where there are images that are important.
Yeah, or space and time, and we heard footsteps going, down the hall, and people are trying to sort of work out like the big city map going right where it couldn't have been here because no one could have driven from this end of town to this end of town, or whatever it is. So some of those visuals coming from you, or at least briefed from you, or is that a different process? Or
no, I mean, when the visuals are integral to the problem solving, then I will have brought in like basic sketches, basic ideas. Okay. Because almost always I will be making sure I test it all, so I need to create some kind of mock-up of whatever the visual is going to be. In quite a few of my Sherlock Holmes Detective cases, I mean, it's using the same basic map as the original game, and there's visual problem solving that does happen in quite a few cases based on that map. But then, of course, I had that map available, so I could use that to do it. But the visual stuff gets done. Does have to be. Obviously, I get to see proofs and stuff and make sure that it does work. Just because, and in this kind of game, particularly with a consulting detective, it can be easy for slip-ups to happen because some of the clues are so subtle. Some of them are kind of multifaceted, and so somebody at the other end, at the publishing end, might be like, okay, well, this is this clue for this thing, so I need to make it look like this in this way, but they haven't realized that another aspect of it is another clue as well, right? You might be like, oh, but hang on, you've put that building supposed to be twice the size of that building, because otherwise they can't work out this thing, and they haven't realized. So there's all these extra little clues, and sometimes I've forgotten what some of those clues are, and then that makes it even harder. So because I'm like, when I'm designing it, I'm like, cool, right? If this building's twice the size, then they can work out that this and this, and then by the time I'm doing it later, I've completely forgotten that was in there, and I have to go through a bit meticulously and to remind myself of those kind of things.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the games you're putting out. It's given a lot of us some headaches to try and follow in your footsteps, if not Sherlock's directly. So thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tak til Dave for sin tid. Thank you, Dave, for taking your time to speak to Papstinenser. Find links til Daves spil på papskubber@dk/papstinenser, hvor du også kan finde links til de tidligere episoder, som blandt andet omhandler escape rooms, episoden dedikeret til 50 Clues og Chronicles of Crime, som alle sammen bliver nævnt her i episoderne. Vi har vist også en episode dedikeret kun Sherlock Holmes. Og med det så er vi færdige med denne episode af Papstinenser. Hvis du vil støtte Papstinenser, så kan du svinge forbi papstinenser.tier.dk, hvor du kan smide en mønt, en tier eller et andet beløb efter hver episode, hvis du har lyst. Hver en krone, der kommer ind, bliver brugt til at udbrede podcasten, hype bræt og kortspil og gøre Papstinenser endnu federe. Det var alt for denne gang. Papstinenser er produceret af Bo Jørgensen og Christian Beckmann. Interviewet med Dave Neale blev lavet af selv samme Bo Jørgensen og Peter Brix. Jeg hedder Christian Bak Petersen, og på vegne af Papstinenser siger jeg elementært, min kære grejs.